of our group. And, again, I'd like to welcome everyone, old and new, to this forum. We generally have meetings once a month. So if this is your first one, try and stay connected with us. There's a lot of good stuff going on. And I just want to quickly thank my board for all the work that they do to, help run this organization throughout the year. So first and foremost, there's Steve Hewitt, who you've all heard from, announcing this meeting and doing tons of background work to make sure that we have presentations, great presentations every month. Priscilla Simon is our VP of membership. Jaron Landavora is our VP of certification and education. Nora O'Reilly is our VP of sponsorship. And Anna White is our treasurer. And then we have Tarab Fadakowadwala, I always have trouble saying that, who helps us with a lot of our technical things. And I think that's everybody, right? Steve, did I leave anybody off? And oh yeah, and Travis Holland, who is our secretary.
Yeah, Travis. Yeah.
And it's a great group of people. I really appreciate all the work they do. Like Steve mentioned, for the people who are just joining, we're going to get quickly to the presentation. We'll leave some time at the end for questions and answers. I think Steve, a lot of the general business information Steve has sent out already. So you can kind of read that offline, and we'll just jump right into it. So some people on this call may know about Kanban, some people may be new to it. So today you're going to learn from an expert about what Kanban is and actually taking it to the next level and making it visual. And we're fortunate today to have Ali Cox from Netmind. They're one of our long-going partners with the Sac Valley IABA. And she's very well versed in agile methodologies. She has many certifications, the CBAP, the AAC, Agile certification from IABA, the CDBA, which is the business analysis data certification. And then PMI also has a PBA, professional business analyst certification, and lots of other things. So Ali is very well versed in things. She has a great deal of experience, and Agile's so hot, and we're lucky to have someone who's very well versed in it. So Ali, I'll turn it over to you and see if you have any more introductions or anything to say, and then you can get us started.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think you guys need to hear that much about me. Let's get right to it. So I see some of you are doing my mentee poll here. I think I've got one more I want to take you through. Let's see if I can get to it. Here we go. So we're going to talk about the Kanban method today. So what is the Kanban method? So if you didn't do the first poll, you can go to menti.com on your phone or your laptop, whatever, and you should see this question pop up when you put that code in up at the top, 46139377. So what is it? Is it using a Kanban board to work through basically what is a to-do list? Is it a framework for managing work that has principles and practices? Is it a collaborative automated tool that helps teams work together? Or I don't know, that's why I'm here. That's my favorite answer. Well, it is trending in the right direction. So while a Kanban, most people call it a Kanban board, but actually Kanban means visible board. So when you say Kanban board, you're really saying visible board, which I think is kind of funny. While the Kanban can be used just as a way to visualize your work, what we're going to talk about today is more about how to implement some of the lean Kanban principles and practices that are really useful. I do have a lot of experience in this area. I'm actually coaching. Right now, I've got 10 teams that I'm coaching across 3 different organizations that are using some form of the Kanban method. And I'm just a real big proponent of it. So you'll see that as we go through this. All right, so I'm going to I'm going to fumble. I'm just going to be honest. I'm probably going to fumble a little bit with this today. Maybe not. Maybe it'll go well because I'm more used to being on Teams than Zoom. But so this is my information. I've just, I think Bob just went through a bunch of my certifications. Apparently, I just like to have initials behind my name. But really, what I wanted here is for you to feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So that's my LinkedIn address, Allie Orcox. And I think Steve or Bob, are you guys going to distribute? If I send you the deck after this, are you going to distribute it out to the members?
Yes, we keep that on our website along with
Okay.
a recording of this.
Awesome. So I'll be sending out what I'm presenting here, you'll actually have access to. So what we're going to do today is talk about the Kanban method itself. What does that mean? Some variations of the Kanban method. We'll talk about what I think is one of the most important parts of Kanban, which is visualization of work and why that is so important and so helpful. We'll talk a little bit about some Kanban metrics and what they mean and how you can use them. If we have time, I don't do very well at getting to the last couple of topics on this presentation because I just get so excited. I talk too much, but we may get into what is the systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban, which I'm going to give you a modified version of that if you're interested in implementing Kanban, like how do I start? How do I get there? What do I do? It's kind of a longer conversation, but I'll at least introduce it to you. And we'll take a brief look at the flight levels of Kanban and my favorite book around Kanban that I'm going to recommend. So let's talk first about, in the quiz I gave you, the right answer was that Kanban is actually a method that has its own principles and practices. And I like to start there because even if you don't use Kanban, some of these principles are just great for helping teams work better together. And, if you're a business analyst in today's world, I think even more than what I would call maybe a more traditional business analyst. So I started doing business analysis back in the 1980s. I know I don't look that old, but I really am. But back then it was really all about writing requirements, but I discovered very quickly that in order to get good requirements, you have to be a good facilitator and get teams to work well together in order to actually get those requirements and then implement them well in a solution. And so I think today's business analyst has even more of a responsibility to help with that facilitation and coordination within the project teams you're in, or whatever level of the organization you're in, whether you're a high-level strategic business analyst or you work, maybe exclusively at the team level. Most of our job, or the most important part of the job, is to help coordinate people. So I do want to know, we are going to go back to Menti for a second. I would like to know, let's see if I can do this. There we go. What do you already know about Kanban? So if you're in Menti, go back to this and you can put in anything you want here. You can put in multiple answers. But what do you already know about Kanban? And you could say nothing. I love it. That's the first one. Yeah, we got a couple of nothings here. A lot of nothings. Well, maybe we'll just dive right in. There's a workflow tool in Jira that uses Kanban. I gotta look behind my people here. Organizing your work. I love that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Continuous improvement. A lot of it's about that. A pull system. We're going to talk about that. That you have to use it and put your projects in it. Okay. So yeah, so we're touching on some of that. So let's go back and get into what it really is. So here is a Kanban board. So like I said earlier, Kanban is actually a Japanese word that means visual board or visual signal. So really at the heart of Kanban is visualization. What does that mean? That means that, most of us in the jobs that we do as business analysts, usually you're doing what we call knowledge work. Knowledge work is not working in a factory, making widgets. Or I always think of that Lucille Ball episode where she's in the chocolate factory. I'm sure most of you have seen that, where she's on the line, she's putting the chocolates everywhere because she can't keep up. You know, we're not doing that kind of work, but when you do that kind of work, it's very visual, right? You can see her, you can see what she's doing within that production line. Well, when we're working on stuff, you don't see it. A lot of times we're thinking and we're putting people's thoughts together, so it's kind of hard to visualize. And so what we want to do is, sorry, I get distracted by the chat. So what one of the basics of the basic principles is, let's visualize our work. And one way to do that is using a Kanban. So Kanban is just a way to organize your work and see how it progresses across the different stages of that work. So, you know, this Kanban is probably a pretty typical application development Kanban. So you've got things in your backlog, which is your to-do. Maybe you plan in the next items to do, you design and develop them, you test them, you deploy them, and then maybe you move them to done. So, and you've got different kinds of items that run across there. Maybe they're user stories or features, defects, tasks that you have to get done, etc. So that's a basic Kanban. So, you know, it is at the heart of the Kanban method, but that's not what the method itself is. The method is a way to manage what I just talked about, which is the knowledge work. It has its principles and practices, which we're going to see here in just a second. Using the Kanban board, once again, that's kind of repetitive, but that's how we usually say it here, is the Kanban board. And also what we call Kanban systems, which I will explain. So let's get into it. Really great book if you're interested in this. It's a book by David J. Anderson, Kanban. But Kanban really, you're going to see a lot of overlap with Lean and Lean Agile. So the same kind of principles and practices, if you're familiar with those, they will look very familiar. And Kanban really started back with the automotive services and actual production lines in factories in Japan way back, many years ago, but has been adapted for our kind of work, for our knowledge work. And it's used out there in a bunch of industries. I'm helping different industries right now that are using Kanban. I'm working with an insurance company. I'm working with a nonprofit out of Colorado that does health services for the underprivileged. I'm working with Ford. I'm working with another health insurance group. So I mean, you can use it in just about any work. I can't imagine that you couldn't. So what we do in Kanban is we model our workflow. So let's take a simple example of a workflow. So, you know, if you're trying to make dinner, maybe you go to the fridge, you get your food, you look for recipes, you follow that recipe, you set the table, and then you eat. That's kind of your process, right? So you got dinner there. Well, you can apply these steps to just about anything you do at work. So let's say that we're trying to get our vacation request approved, right? So, you know, we try to figure out how many days we'll have available. We request those days, ask for approval. So that's how we get through that. Or maybe we're purchasing a service from a vendor. We may have to create a purchase order, ask for approval, and send a PO out. Those are just typical processes, right? So what we can do is take these processes, especially if they are repetitive. If there's work where we have a certain process that we take it through every time, then you can start modeling your Kanban and make it fit those practices. So let's talk about how you do that. One thing that we say in Kanban, one of the basic principles is we want to start where we are now. So what I don't typically do is jump into a team and say, okay, we're going to blow apart your process. You're going to do everything different now if you're trying to improve. We really want to look at how do you get done what you do now, start there, and then do some evolutionary change over time as you learn about your work. So typically what I find is that a group will say, oh yeah, we have to do this, 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 and this. But then when they start visualizing it and understanding it better, they realize, oh, we really don't need to do this step, or we need to rearrange this flow to make it better. So you want to do that incrementally, or evolution, incrementally and iteratively, I want to say, over time, so that you're making small improvements instead of trying to like change the whole way that you do work all at once. Another principle that we talk about in Kanban is that we have leadership at all levels. I could go on for hours about this, but I'm just going to leave it at that for this presentation. But in order to really get to high performing teams and high performing organizations, people have to be leaders at every level of the team or the organization. Otherwise, you have people that aren't contributing as fully as they could. So what does leadership at all levels mean? It means that we take control of our own work and figure out better ways to do it. But that also means that we need to encourage our leaders, like our management, to let us be leaders at all levels. So, that decision making, we need to figure out as an organization, where can decisions be made and who should make them, and push decision making down as much as we can to the people who are actually doing the work. So for example, within a team, they may be able to, if they're given a vision or some objectives, they should be able to determine what work do they need to get done in order to meet those objectives, instead of being told how to get that work done. So anyway, that's a whole nother topic. If anybody's interested in that, you can contact me and I can talk about it all day, like I said. But let's go through the practices of Kanban, lean Kanban. The first one, like I said, is visualization. So we're going to talk a little bit more about visualization in a bit, but we want to understand our workflow. We want to visualize it in a Kanban. And what this does for us, and I kind of put in this analogy of no skinny mirrors. What you don't want to be doing is looking at what you're doing and have a higher opinion of what's being done than is actually there. And when you visualize the work, you can really tell what's going on. You can tell what's not going well. You can tell what is going well. And that can help you improve the process, instead of just kind of saying, oh yeah, we're doing great, but you're really not. The second practice that we talk about is that we want to limit our work in process. This is huge. So a lot of people say, oh yeah, I multitask really well. If anybody ever says that, they're lying to you. A human person cannot multitask, at least not in knowledge work. It has been proven neurologically that the brain cannot think of two things at one time. You may be really good at switching contexts quickly, but you can't actually think of two things at the same time. So what happens when we're working, when we're constantly bouncing between, the 10 different things that we have going on right now, every time you have to context switch to think of something new, you lose about 20% of your productivity. Right? And you can look this up. There's brain science that has proved this. And a lot of people don't believe it, but if you just look at if you think about when you've got a lot going on, if you have to put one thing down and pick up something else that you were working on, if you're a typical person, you probably have to kind of backtrack a little bit to figure out, okay, now where was I on this? What was I doing? So you end up losing a lot of time. And if you limit your work in process, so what we talk about in Lean Kanban is stop starting and start finishing. So if you limit your work in process and say, okay, if I just concentrate on getting this one thing done and get to it, then I can get to the next thing faster. It actually turns out that in the end, everything gets done faster. So limit the work in process. That's very key and hard to do, but key. We want to manage the flow. So, I already talked about, we got to understand the process of how we get through the work that we do. And we've got to ensure that the work itself is as fluid as possible, that our work can move through our Kanban so it can get from our backlog to done smoothly. And the visualization of work really helps with this as well, because everybody can see what's going on. The fourth practice is to make our policies explicit. Well, what does this mean? So this is a great way to talk about working agreements. So this is really what this means is, especially if we're within a team, we need an agreement within the team on how are we going to work together, including how we're going to treat each other. I really like to encourage teams to do that, like how we're going to respect each other, how often are we going to meet. But in terms of lean Kanban, that working agreement, a lot of people call those team contracts, or I like to call it team alliance. That team alliance you should also discuss as a team, what is our criteria for when work gets pulled in? Who prioritizes it? How do we know it's ready to pull in? So, if you're working on a software development team, a great way to understand your pull criteria is to talk with the team about what we call a definition of ready. How do we know that whatever we're doing is ready to go into design and development, for example? So, when I work with teams, I have them come up with a list of, okay, what does ready mean to you? Does it mean that you understand all your business rules for a particular user story or feature or whatever you're working on? Do you understand all the data that needs to be used? If we need a prototype, is that included? Do we have acceptance criteria so that we know what to test against? So having that understanding of when something is ready to be worked on really helps us understand, okay, when do we pull it into our doing status? Another thing that we talk about with the Kanban is what we call the WIP limit. So you may hear discussion on this. Our work in progress, that's your WIP, work in progress. So for a team, what you don't want to do is have them working on 20 things at once. Once again, we want to try to minimize our work in progress, because the more you minimize it, the faster you can get individual things done, and the better the work will flow, and the faster overall you're going to get stuff done. So the example I like to talk about with that one is actually projects. It's not just at the team level, but at a portfolio level. Let's say, or program level, let's say you have project A, B, and C that have to get done. Well, what so many organizations do is they say, okay, we've got these 3 teams, they can work on all 3 of those projects. So what do? You have that team can't work on all 3 at once. That's impossible. So what you do, if you have project A, they do a little bit of A, then they do a little bit of B, and do a little bit of C. And then they go back to A, and then they do some of B, they do some of C. So, if you say, if you plan out those 3 projects, and if you said, okay, just in effort, if we just worked on one at a time, they would each be 2 months. So what most organizations do is they do those little slivers, and instead of being able to deliver project A in 2 months, project B in 4 months, and project C in 6 months, they do those little slivers, and everybody has to wait 6 months to get A, B, and C. And really, in reality, they probably have to wait more because of all the context switching that add that 20% of time. So you're probably talking about more like 7 or 8 months that it takes to get those 3 projects done. Well, why not just do A, finish A in 2 months, then you start on B, finish B at 4 months, and the C will take 6 months, but C was going to have to wait 6 months anyway. So it's just it's so logical, but it's so contrary to what most organizations do. So it's just something to think about to try to limit that WIP. Okay. We also talk about in making what we call our policies or the way we work together explicit, we talk about, okay, what kind of work do we have? Do we need to treat different types of work differently? And I'm going to show you some examples of that in just a little bit. Also, we want to understand, okay, what do we do with dependencies within our work? What do we do with when something gets blocked? Like we can't get it done because we're waiting on, either some other department or somebody outside the organization to resolve something for us, and the work is blocked. So what do we do? So you want to get the whole team on the same page around how do we treat our work? What do we do? And you want to make it explicit. So you want to write it down somewhere and have it where the team can access it. All right, the next practice is feedback loop. So somebody, when I said, what is Lean Kanban, you put in continuous improvement. That's what we're talking about here. Is part of continuous improvement is you've got to have good feedback loops. So in Lean Kanban, just like if some of you are on Scrum teams, I would imagine, if you're in an organization that uses one of the Agile approaches, you may use Scrum. You've got constant feedback going on, typically on an Agile team, where at regular intervals, you stop and say, okay, how are we doing? What can we do better? What aren't we doing well? Let's fix it. What are we doing well? Let's keep doing those things. So those feedback loops are crucial to continuous improvement and really for innovation, to say, okay, hey, how can we get better? So Lean Kanban also has regular feedback loops. And that feeds into, we want to improve together collaboratively within our team. And we want to, what we call, evolve experimentally. So I just had a conversation today with a team that is implementing Kanban, and they're trying to figure out, how do we coordinate the bigger pieces of work we have, and what do we do with the smaller day-to-day tasks we have? This is an HR group, so they have like projects going on, and they have, having to answer employee questions and problems and all of that. And so what I told them was, try this, this, and this. I gave them a few suggestions. I said, and then in a couple of weeks or a month, see if that works, experiment with it, and then you can tweak it, because you don't just put something in place and say, okay, it's done. We don't ever have to do anything with it again. You're always looking at yourselves to say, what can we do better? So that folds right into that notion of continuous improvement as well. Okay, so let's talk about visualization. I think this is one of the most important parts, especially if you're just starting up with Kanban or you want to experiment with it. The visualization is the way to start. So your Kanban, what we call Kanban systems, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a bit, but when you put together these Kanban boards to help you manage work, you might end up with a whole system. And like I said, I'll explain that later. But what we're not doing is modeling any kind of organizational chart. Kanban is not used to manage people. And really, in the Agile world, the Kanban world, the Lean world, we really encourage people to get away from managing people. Instead of trying to manage people, manage the work. So it's been pretty much proven over and over, and I've seen it in many organizations, that when we try to keep people busy all the time, that's when the work is not the most efficient. What you want to do is manage continuous flow of work, which may or may not keep people busy all the time. But the most important part is getting the work done, not keeping people busy. I've run into teams, just a team last week, where somebody had we're using Kanban, and it turned out that a person on this team, they were kind of blocked from working because they had to wait on some other stuff. And they're like, the manager was like, well, they've got to be working. And I said, why? What do you want them to work on? There's nothing for them to work on. I said, if they don't have specific tasks they want to work on, hey, why don't we use those downtime for learning? Like, let them take a class. Let them look into, maybe doing some experiments for innovation. You know, there's no room for that if people are just busy doing their work all the time. So that's something to think about as well. But what we're trying to understand when we model our Kanban is who's asking us for the work that we're doing. So who's requesting it? What are the volumes of work that they request? What are kind of the patterns? What are the steps we have to take? Who's going to deliver that service or that product? What are people asking us to do and how are we delivering it? So let's take kind of a look at, let's take a look at that. So we already saw an example of a design of a board and maybe a typical set of steps. So once again, these columns that you see on this board might be your typical steps in your process. So here, first we plan, then we develop, then we test, then we deploy, and then we're done. So our basic steps in the middle there are plan, develop, test, and deploy. So those big steps that we take in order to get work done, that's what we want to visualize and model so that we can see where our work is at any point in time. Another thing that we want to look at when we are looking at a Kanban system and visualizing our work is, what do we need to know about that work? And so what I talk about a lot especially when I teach classes on Lean Kanban, is to do this, at least at first, do this physically with paper sticky notes, you know, and don't start off with a tool, because I think that tactile piece of using the actual sticky notes is really cool. And it also helps people think through, what do I need to know about this work before I get into some tool that a lot of times the tools dictate what you need to know about work. So you might want to look at the kinds of work that you do and say, okay, what do I need to know about it? So, yeah, you know, maybe we indicate somewhere that we've got dependency. So we've got this red dot on this ticket that indicates a dependency. I really like the progress bar. I used to do these manually on tickets where, you know, you have the little kind of ticker that goes across, and as thing gets near a due date, you can see it getting closer. You actually mark it off physically. So that may be something you need to know about your work. You may need to know the history of what's been done on it, how big it is, like an estimate of it, if it's a high priority or not. So all these little things that we need to know about the work, you might want to put on these, what we call these tickets or work items that we can represent on the Kanban with the sticky notes. I don't think I have it on here, but we might want to know who's working on that. Like you might have the person assigned on here as well. That ticket design, that really having a good understanding of what that work entails is important. So that's part of that visualization. So here's another typical Kanban that I've used on real projects. Is very similar, where you can even have swim lanes across your Kanban. So if you look at this, we've got 3 types of work that this team does. They do change requests, maintenance, production defects, possibly, or bugs, right? And what we want to do is build out a Kanban that helps us pull work across. And so one of the things that is pretty cool to do with a Kanban is to actually even break down your steps. So you can see here we've got an analysis step and a development step. Notice that those columns themselves, I've broken them down to in progress and done. Well, what does this do for us? Well, let's say we're on this team, and let's say that I pull in this story right here. I don't know, can y'all see my mouse? I don't know if anybody can answer me.
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to be pointing at something and you can't see what I'm pointing to. So if this is my ticket right here, my piece of work, my user story maybe that I'm working on here. So once I've done that analysis, I'm going to move it to my done column. That tells everybody on my team that I'm done with the analysis on that story and it's waiting. Who's it waiting for? Well, if development is typically my next step in the process, then the developer can go, oh, Allie got done with that analysis. It must have all the great requirements in it. I'm going to pull it over to mine, hence the pull system. I'm going to pull it into my column when I'm ready to do it. When I don't have anything else in my WIP, in my work in progress, I can pull that in, right? And then when I'm done with it, if I'm the developer, I'll stick it here. And then we know that whoever's going to build it out can pull it here. When it's ready for test, it can be pulled here. So you can actually break down these columns to make it more of a pull system. Okay. Another thing to note on this Kanban is my WIP limit. Remember, we talked about WIP being work in progress. And so the team has decided that we're not going to have more than 5 items in our backlog. We're not going to have more than 4 items in analysis, not more than 4 in dev, et cetera. So these WIP limits across the top tell us how many we can have at any one time. And that really helps us to focus on getting things done, pushing it to the right. Okay. Here's another Kanban example. I can't remember what tool this was in, but it's from a tool. Notice that these tools can help you do a lot of the same things that you can do on the physical sticky notes. You can assign people to them. You can have icons that mean different things or colors that mean different things. And the team should decide on, okay, how do we want that board to look so that we understand the work that's going on? So when I talk about those tickets, so those work item types, they can be all different kinds of things. So, you know, on a typical development team, they might be, or software development, they might be user stories. Well, if you're on a marketing team, you might have different types of work items like reports or trade show demos. For HR, like I said, you know, we had the example of the vacation request earlier, or maybe the steps for employee training, right? So it's just depending on the area that you're in, your work item types might be different things. Okay. And you may not treat all items the same. So, you know, you might have things that are urgent or have to be expedited. So you can indicate those with your sticky notes as well. And I'll show you an example of different types of items in a few minutes, or right now, actually. So typically in Lean Kanban, we talk about 4 different classes of service. What does that mean? That means, how do we handle the work that we're doing? And the way that we categorize this is we compare cost of delay of doing that piece of work, like what is it going to cost us not to do it? And then against time, right? So for typical items, what we call standard items, the cost of delay goes up gradually over time, right? So if there's typical things that you're doing, if you don't get on them right away, maybe there's no cost, so we're down here, but over time, that cost of delay is going to start ramping up. So these are things that have no specific delivery date. They may not have any value until they're delivered, or they don't have any value until they're actually delivered, until you've finished them. And typically how you want to handle these is first in, first out. So whichever things come in first, those are the first things you pull. Okay. So the second category that we talk about is fixed date. So the fixed date is when something has a due date. So typically what happens is there's no cost of delay until you hit that due date. Let's say this is the due date here where my cursor is. But if you don't hit that due date, that cost of delay shoots up. You know, that may be something like it's a regulatory due date that you have to meet. And if you don't meet it, your company gets fined. Right. So that could be an example of that. So you've got to deliver on or before that date. And what you want to do is pull that into your work in time, obviously, to be able to finish it by that due date. So, you know, if you're using a Kanban, it can help you plan when to pull that in. We also have expedite items. Those are things that are urgent, that the cost delay is very steep on. So you can see here, you know, right away that cost delay is going up. So delay is unacceptable. it will do something catastrophic to us or our organization. And this is the one time that I tell teams, this is the one time you can violate your agreed upon limits of your work in progress, because we've just got to get that done. Now, it probably means one of these standard items that you might have that you're already working on will get delayed, right? Because you've got this item is expedited over it. But you also can only have one expedited thing at a time, at least per person, because you can't work on two things at once. So you've got to take them one at a time. The last category of class of service I talk about is what we call the intangibles. Some people on technical teams might call this like technical debt. So there are things that it's kind of like flossing your teeth or brushing your teeth. If you don't brush your teeth for one day, your teeth probably aren't going to fall out. But if you go a long time doing it, you know, all of a sudden, boof, your teeth start falling out, which is not good. So, you know, at some point you've got to address these things or you're going to get behind. So what you want to do is plan for those so that you're not overwhelmed with that debt and then it all comes crashing down on you at once. So we talk about those classes of service. So these may even be things that when you're visualizing your work, you have some kind of visualization of, okay, what kind of thing is this? Is it something that we have to expedite? Is it a technical debt that we want to make sure gets up there, but it's not quite as urgent, right? So probably this is about the last thing that we're going to talk about in here, and then I want to talk about a great book if this interests you. Let's talk a little bit about metrics. And so the most important metric that I think you deal with in work is that work in progress limit. Very important to help you, like I said, stop starting and start finishing work. And also lead time, some people call it cycle time. So how long does it take us to get work done? So I want to do a little example here of a drive-in, like a drive-in restaurant, you know, like a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A, something like that. So what we did, this is a fake study, but I'm going to act like it's real. So what we did, we studied the time it takes to place an order at a drive-through. And so what we found was it takes our customers 20 seconds to pay or to order, 30 seconds to pay, and then 40 seconds to pick up, right? So you can see that's 90 seconds. And this only really holds though if we've got one car going through. So let's look at that first. So we've got this one car coming through our drive-through line. And so what we understand here is that we have only got a width of one, right? There's one car. Well, if we look at the time it takes, our lead time, also called cycle time, is 90 seconds, right? That's how long it takes to get through all of our process. And that's what we want to understand is put all of our steps together. How long does it take to get something done? Okay. There's another metric that's called delivery rate, or sometimes some people call it throughput, which is your width divided by your lead time. Now, this number right here has really no meaning at all until you start to look at some other things. So I'm going to come back to this in just a second. Let's look at our next example. So our width here is 5. We've got 5 cars on our line, right? So our width is 5. Our lead time now is 200, and you can't tell this by anything. You would have to measure this, right? But obviously, it's not going to be 90 seconds for all of these cars anymore. So our average lead time is 200 seconds because they're going to have some wait time in between here, right? They can't just fly through the 3 windows. Okay. So if we look at the delivery rate now, once again, we're dividing width by our cycle time, we get 0.025. So what's the difference between these two? Let's look at one more example and then we'll talk about that. Let's look at width of 3. I'm going to rush through this a little bit more, but so now we've got the cycle time of 120, which we had to measure. We went back and looked at if with 3 cars through, how long does it take them to get through? Well, now we've got a delivery rate of, again, of 0.025. Okay, so what do you guys think? Let's use the chat on this. Which of these 3 scenarios are the best for the drive-through restaurant? Which of these 3 is best? Is having WIP of 1, 5, or 3? Can anybody guess? Let's use your chat. Okay, I see 3, 3, 3. What made you guys say 3? I see a 1 and a 5. Yeah, okay, so people have guessed all 3. So it's actually, if you said 3, you're right. So why is it? Well, the delivery rate is the number of items that in this case, that we are selling per the time period. So there are different time periods here. So what we can do is just compare the delivery rate of the 3. And so 0.025 for WIP of 5 and 3 are high. That means we're selling more than the 0.01. Well, that's, I mean, you kind of go, you want to go, duh, Allie. If you just have 1 car coming through at a time, you're not making as much money, right? Right. So as far as the organization, either 5 or 3 is best. But it's kind of a trick question, because what's better for the customer? If you look at the customer wants their food fast, right? So probably the cycle time of 90 is probably best for them, but it's pretty bad for us. So you got to kind of find the sweet spot of your delivery rate versus your lead time. So the sweet spot for this, if you compare these 3, is the 120. Why is that? Well, it's not 200. They don't have to wait too long. 120 is not too much worse than 90, but our throughput is the same as if we had 5 cars going through. So with 3 cars, your customers are going to be happy and you're going to be making the same amount of money per time period. So whoever said 3, you were right. There was a long explanation for that. So it's really interesting to understand what work in progress limit is best for our kind of work that we're doing, to have nice, smooth flow of work, not have too many cars or too much work just sitting around doing nothing, but also so that we're not getting backed up. So that WIP combined with that cycle time or lead time is really crucial. So I've got a little illustration here of the customer lead time, system lead time, and cycle time. So let's look at that. So your cycle time is from the time that you start working on something until it's done. So you start work until you deliver the work. That's considered your cycle time, sometimes called lead time. But the nuance on the lead time versus cycle time is that your lead time sometimes is considered to be starting not when you start work, but when you commit to do the work. Because people don't, that you say, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Maybe they think you're working on it, but you haven't started work on it yet. So another thing that's great about the Kanban, if you make it visible, is people can see that, oh yeah, you said you're going to do this work, but it's sitting in your backlog still because you're working on all of this stuff. But at least they can see, okay, let's say this is the piece of work that I asked the team to do. Oh, well, it's 3rd down in the list, so that means they're probably going to be working on it pretty soon. Okay. The customer lead time is a little bit different. It's from at the time that the customer requested that we do some work, but maybe we haven't committed to it yet. So that's the difference between these two, that somebody has asked for something, but we haven't said we're going to do it. So it might be in some idea bucket or some request bucket. Steve is asking, are you committed to work once it's on the backlog? Typically, yes. That doesn't mean it can't be decommitted to. So for example, one of the teams I'm working with on a claim system for an insurance company last week, we had something in the backlog that had been there a while. And I said, we need to go look at our backlog and make sure these things are still valid. Well, we found this story that had been in there that really didn't make sense anymore based on the changes that the application, the solution had gone through as we were working through it. So we checked with the person that asked for it. We confirmed that, oh yeah, that's covered. We've got that. That's already done. And then we pulled it out of the backlog. So I say, Steve, you're committed to it, but that doesn't mean that it still might not get trashed at some point because you've decided, oh, things have changed, right? So there may be a pivoting. And I know there was a question earlier on tools. Licensed and or free Kanban tools. Let me go to that real quick. There are a lot of licensed tools out there. The biggest ones are Jira and I would say Azure DevOps. I use both. I use Azure right now a lot for a team that I'm on. I can't say that it's my favorite tool. It's just very complicated. But if you're on big teams and that's what they use, that's a really good tool. And you can set up Azure DevOps for either Scrum teams using sprints or iterations, or for just Kanban, just free flow Kanban that doesn't have the sprints. And if anybody wants to talk to me about that offline, I'm glad to do that. Asana, I think, is probably my favorite free Kanban tool. Also, Miro and Mural are great collaboration boards that have kind of manual Kanbans in them. So if you want to ping me on LinkedIn or email me for some more suggestions on that, I can help with that. I think what I'm going to do is wrap up with the next couple of slides. And then take some questions. So one of the things that you will see in some of those tools is that you can get a good read on what you're doing visually as well by looking at a cumulative flow diagram. And so what is this? So what this is showing you is for all of these items, the work items that you have in the different stages of your work. So, you know, we've seen a lot of examples with a backlog, and then it goes to dev, test, done, and deployed, or vice versa. You can see that on this cumulative flow diagram, you can take a look and see vertically here, how many items. So on the vertical axis, we've got the number of items, or it could be user stories or work items. How many do we have going on at the same time? So that talks that you can, that's a good visual of your WIP limit. Horizontally, you can look at if horizontally we've got the days across on the bottom. The cycle time is the amount of time, like we said, before you start to work on an item and it gets done. The lead time could also add in there how long it sits in a backlog. So what the diagram can start to show you is how are we level on our WIP? Do we have too many things going on at once? Ideally, you want the bands that go across your CFD, your cumulative flow diagram, to be fairly steady in relation to each other. That is an indication of a very stable workflow where things are flowing in and flowing out at a regular rate, and they're not getting clogged up. And so it can help you understand where do you have problems within your workflow? Where are our bottlenecks? Is it taking us too long to get stuff done? Do we need to rearrange people and their capacity in order to get work done better? So it's kind of a cool way to look at that. And I don't really have time to go into static, but I do want to talk about my favorite book, and then I'll take questions. If you're interested in Kanban and how to help optimize the teams that you're on and help them work better together, I know that's maybe not typically the role of a BA, but I think, like I said earlier in the webinar, you know, one of our the greatest things that we can offer to a team is to help them work together better. Not only to be that bridge for requirements and good analysis, but also helping the team understand itself, not only the requirements, but helping the team understand itself and how the team can work better together, because that's really what's going to drive great solutions. I mean, great requirements drive great solutions as well. But if your process for using those requirements and getting them to a good solution, if it's not a good process, then you're kind of wasting your time, right? So anyway, this is my favorite book on Kanban. It's a really good read. I've read it about like 3 times. So if you're into books, that's a great one. And if you want some other recommendations on books, I have plenty. Okay, so I'm gonna see if I can gracefully cut out of the presentation and let's take questions. Man, I talked too much already. But do we have, I have a few minutes for questions. I know that we had some in the chat.
Allie, this has been great. You don't talk too much.
Oh,
I've learned a lot.
oh, good. Thank you. Jill, I see you say we also have a constrained column to show stories that were in progress but have stopped. Yes, I love that. The blocker column, the constrained column, or swim lane. I love that, because what you can do with that is you can visually move those stories into that column and you can track how long they've been there. And so it can start to help you understand where you have blockers and what you can do about them. It also is a good visualization for whoever you're waiting on to resolve those blockers, because it's kind of like in their face, like, oh yeah, I know you're waiting on me. It's sitting in that blocked area. So I love that, Jill. Anything else? Anybody have anything else? I'm looking back through the chat.
Well, Allie, even though you didn't have time to talk about it, what is static? Just
static. Yeah, static is a system thinking approach to introducing Kanban. And so there's actually a free book. Shoot, I should have been prepared to tell you this. Let me see if I can find it real quick. You know what I do? I'll send it in the deck. If it's not already in there, I'll send a reference to it. I think it actually is in there, because the page that I showed about the book Kanban, there's a free version of that takes you through what are the steps to introducing Kanban to a team. And basically those steps are that you start where you are, your process that you have right now. You look at who asks you for work, where does it come from, how does it get to you? And then you figure out what are your steps from getting that work from that request to done. And you lay out your Kanban based on those steps. And then you understand, okay, once it's gone out of our work area, who does it go to? How does it get there? And so you look at that, and then you start using the Kanban and figure out, okay, is this set up appropriately for our team? So you do that kind of, what we call the evolutionary change to tweak that Kanban as needed, like putting in things like Jill suggested. Maybe you put in a blocker area that you didn't have before. So did that make sense, Judy? That was like the fastest I could explain.
It sure did. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Yeah, I do. Yeah, Edward Deming was definitely involved, Carolyn, with Kanban. Absolutely. If you look up the history of Kanban and Lean, Deming's right in there. And the Deming learning cycle, if you've heard of that. And I love that, Tracy, that you implemented Kanban 30 years ago. It's awesome. It's been around. Yeah, it's been around, I think, since the 1950s. Yeah, and if anybody wants more information on anything I've talked about today, please feel free to connect with me. I'll be glad to answer more questions via email or on LinkedIn. But I think that's about it for me.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ellie. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.